Greetings, my name is James Famwina, and I'm a PhD student with the Troy University Global Leadership Program. Today's presentation is going to be on the Experiential Cultural Tourism Model, otherwise known as ECTM. You're witnessing a nuclear explosion at the Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands, part of the Compact of Free Association Nations, also known as COFA. Between 1946 and 1958, the United States conducted 67 nuclear tests at the Bikini and Eniwetok atolls. All of these in pursuit of global dominance through the supremacy of nuclear arms. The most famous of these tests was the Castle Bravo test in 1954. At that time, it's the largest explosion ever detonated by the United States. The legacy of nuclear testing in the Bikini Atoll vividly illustrates the profound challenges of COFA nations, particularly in health and economic sectors. These countries stand as prime examples of vulnerability, with communities at the brink due to threats of climate change, sea level rise, and environmental catastrophes. Yet, amidst these adversities, the spirit of resilience still thrives. The communities have not only survived, they have adapted and overcome, changing their narrative from victims to resilient survivors. Today I'll be going over the following items in my presentation: the origin of the ECTM, the Experiential Cultural Tourism Model, the COFA nations, otherwise known as the Compact of Free Associated States, the nation's disparities and their need for sustainable development, applying the ECTM means toward the COFA nations' resiliency. I'll talk about the RICE framework and the CBED WEBB concept, transferring tourism into an experiential engagement, the value of intervention, and how we can work with community assets. I'll get into the designing and evaluation of the Experiential Cultural Tourism Model, and then I'll leave with some takeaways and a recap. In Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow, he paints an almost romantic illustration of missiles flying through the air and exploding, causing a vivid aerial tapestry referring to how it left the skies with a glorious and ominous glow. Unfortunately for the indigenous people of the Marshall Islands, Pynchon's narrative does not actually present an accurate picture of what occurred. There was no unveiling of surreal brilliance from missiles. Instead, they witnessed their own destruction tied to a legacy and defeated acceptance of being subjects in a nuclear and human experimentation project. I want to explore with my own research if there was a way to transform this old methodology of inhumane experimentation into one of empowerment, disrupting the concept of tourism and rebranding it as something different. The Compact of Free Association, COFA nations, which consists of 3 sovereign countries, the Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and the Republic of Palau, had their benefit and welfare prioritized as the subject of this research. In considering the benefits of applying this concept, it was imperative to investigate the merits of positioning them to become beneficiaries of experiential cultural tourism. This investigation was conducted through a review of literature of the region and alternative economic methods, to start with the concept of cultural tourism. According to the United Nations World Tourism Organization, called the UNWTO, cultural tourism is categorized by visitors' intrinsic motivation to learn, discover, and encompass features of a society. Through the review of literature, 2 concepts were produced: the resilient intersectional community-based empowerment, RICE framework, and the community-based economic development wealth equity building blocks, CBED WEBB. The concept of experiential cultural tourism, the ECTM model, is offered as a method of placing emphasis on engaging tourists not only as observers of history, but also advocates in their own cultural tourism experience. It encourages meaningful interactions by facilitating encounters with survivors, activists, and community leaders during their visit. As previously stated, the focus is on COFA communities, and questions arise as to whether the experiential cultural tourism model can enhance their economic empowerment, preserve their cultural heritage, and improve their community resilience. The 2 proposed concepts of the RICE framework and the CBED WEBB as components of the Experiential Cultural Tourism Model ECTM, aim to change the tourism industry from being just leisure-based to creating a more meaningful experience for travelers. RICE and CBED WEBB suggests that by optimizing community-based assets, they can address significant issues such as the nuclear legacy and the challenges posed by climate change. The ECTM introduces strategies and recommendations focused on improving the quality of life for COFA nations. This includes fostering economic development, preserving cultural heritage, and strengthening community resilience. The model promotes sustainable cultural tourism, benefiting various stakeholders involved in the development of the COFA nations. To grasp the intricacies involved with the COFA nations, an exploration of poverty systems, including the core livelihood systems of income maintenance, food and security, health and education, and housing, needs to unfold. Soich in 2015 reviewed these and highlighted them as critical gaps in services that directly contributed to poverty alleviation with poor countries like the COFA nations. As articulated by the Commission on Human Rights in 2019, COFA migrants faced a disproportionate challenge when it came to homelessness, unemployment, and inadequate health care. This, compounded by the lack of information in their native language, contributed to systems of discrimination and impeded their access to decent housing, employment, and other government services. With these poverty systems, there lies a spectrum of challenges, ranging from restricted access to the fundamental resources like education and healthcare to inadequate critical infrastructure needs. The lack of information in their native language, which contributes also to miscommunication, is a determinant of systemic discrimination and impedes their access to decent housing, employment, and essential government services. With these poverty systems lies a spectrum of challenges, ranging from restricted access to fundamental resources like education and healthcare to the adequacy of critical infrastructure needs. To provide some further context, the origins of the Compacts of Free Associations trace back to the aftermath of World War II. During that time, the United Nations entrusted the United States with administering authority over these strategically designated Pacific Islands as a safeguard for national security. At the time, Secretary of State George Marshall played a significant role during the 1947 hearings to ratify the UN trusteeship. Between 1946 and 1958, the United States conducted over 67 nuclear tests in the Marshall Islands, and this significantly impacted the Micronesian people, resulting in many of them relocating and irradiating their agricultural lands, making them inhabitable and fallow. The vulnerability of COFA nations to external destabilizing events is closely tied to their existing dynamics. A disruption in one area, whether economic or environmental, can set off a cascading effect. External factors, including natural disasters, global economic shifts, and geopolitical influences, have the potential to heighten vulnerabilities within these communities. These gains add significance against the backdrop of evolving dynamics in the Indo-Pacific region, a focal point of the United States. Building upon this context provided by the COFA nations, it underscores the interconnected nature of the challenges, examining vulnerabilities arising from both poverty systems and external destabilizing events. In considering transforming communities impacted by poverty and external destabilizing events, there needs to be a strategic approach. This approach should emphasize inclusivity and community engagement to drive sustainable economic development. The Resilient Intersectional Community-Based Empowerment RICE framework is a potential strategy. Key components of this framework that have been adapted from the tenets of community-based economic development include resilient community building, developing intersectional perspectives, empowering marginalized communities, and lifting disenfranchised populations. Another strategy to consider is the community-based economic development wealth equity building blocks, or CBED WEBB. CBED WEBB focuses on building the capacity to develop wealth in underdeveloped communities as a community-driven, equity-focused, and culturally sensitive strategy for economic development. What differentiates CBED WEBB from the RICE framework is its focus on developing wealth specifically to attain wealth equity. To create wealth equity, there is a need to leverage local strengths and resources while respecting cultural and environmental considerations. Examples of these strategies include microenterprise and small business development, local cooperatives, skills development and education, social impact investing, cultural and heritage preservation, and digital inclusion and connectivity. The advantages of integrating RICE and CBED WEBB are inclusive community empowerment, which promotes ownership and participation among marginalized communities, boosting their economic engagement, along with cultural sensitivity, which ensures that development initiatives are culturally relevant and inclusive, respecting the diverse traditions and values of the shareholders. It also includes resilient community building, which helps communities overcome challenges by leveraging their inherent strengths for sustainable growth. It allows for customized solutions, which provide a tailored approach to address unique challenges in innovative ways. It includes long-term sustainability, focusing on creating foundations for lasting economic growth and stability. And finally, maximizing the limited resources, utilizing the local resources and community-based methods, develop practical development models that reduce dependency on foreign investment and support. Transitioning to discussions on external destabilizing events and the United States Indo-Pacific strategy, the concept of transitioning tourism into the Experiential Cultural Tourism Model emerges as a viable option for the COFA nations, driven by their unique circumstances and geographic location in the Indo-Pacific. COFA nations possess a wealth of internal resources, and the transformation of tourism into the Experiential Cultural Tourism Model aligns with the imperative to create assets from these resources. One distinct asset lies in their nuclear legacy, an aspect that can be reframed as a commodity for experiential tourism. Climate change preparation becomes another valuable aspect that can attract tourists. COFA nations situated in vulnerable geographic locations are at the forefront of climate-related challenges. The evolution offers the COFA nations a distinctive value proposition, portraying them not merely as tourist destinations, but as educators, storytellers, and custodians of their own unique narrative. Embracing their ancestral history as master seafarers, made popular by master navigator Mau Pialug, also known as Papa Mau, the COFA nations can use the Experiential Cultural Tourism Model to showcase their historic lineage as voyagers and navigators. Mau's influence inspires a revival of tradition for wayfinding across Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia. For COFA nations, the assistance of an intermediary organization will be essential to achieve the goals of RICE and CBED WEBB. An example to consider is the Maui 2023 wildfires, where the island was faced with significant devastation, particularly with the loss of Lahaina, its economic hub. The event highlighted the crucial role that the Hawaii Pacific Advisory Group, known as HPAG, played, balancing the needs of tourism development with the preservation of Maui's unique cultural and natural heritage, which forms its valued sense of place. Intermediate organizations can significantly boost economic development for COFA nations by harnessing their culture and their natural resources. These organizations can effectively establish partnerships between COFA nations and a variety of stakeholders, including international bodies, NGOs, and private investors. To ensure that the Experiential Cultural Tourism Model framework is grounded in equity, an intermediary organization can implement equity-focused quality improvement approaches. These include conducting equity assessments, engaging with the community, and making decisions based on data. Such measures ensure that the Experiential Cultural Tourism Model initiatives are guided by principles of justice and inclusivity. Let's look at the idea of community assets. A community asset refers to any resource, attribute, or feature within a community that holds value, contributes to its well-being, and can be leveraged towards resilience, wealth, and sustainable development. In the context of this model, a community asset encompasses both tangible and intangible elements that play a role in developing the experiential experience. This approach ensures that the identification of deficits is not only a one-size-fits-all endeavor, but rather a tailored assessment that considers the specific context of the COFA communities. The deficits include various aspects ranging from socioeconomic disparities and healthcare limitations to educational constraints and infrastructural challenges. This process serves as a catalyst for forging a sustainable and community-driven path in transformative tourism development. By identifying and strategically leveraging these experiential assets, it lays a foundation for an approach that not only enhances the allure of COFA nations as tourist destinations, but also has the potential to enrich socioeconomic issues. When considering if a project is appropriate for experiential cultural tourism, the following criteria can be applied. First, ask, what's the concept? How can we utilize cultural and natural assets for sustainable tourism in COFA nations? Second, the strategic question on the use of the cultural asset, asking, how do we identify and use this cultural asset like traditional navigation or historical sites? Then, assessing and enhancing cultural engagement is the third criteria. Asking the question, how can we assess cultural engagement using something like the RICE framework? Customize experience for sustainability. The question you ask is, how do we tailor this tourism experience for each of the COFA communities? To get into the long-term sustainability and collaboration, you ask the questions of what are the impacts, how do we collaborate with the community members and partners involved? Next, we look at the maximizing of the limited resources and ask how can we maximize cultural and natural assets with the limited resource and how long can we use them? Finally, in community empowerment, we ask the question, how does this experiential cultural tourism initiative empower the community and preserve the cultural heritage? In the context of evolving global tourism, COFA nations have a unique opportunity to redefine the cultural tourism landscape. By leveraging their rich heritage and aligning with sustainable development goals, they can create a model that not only attracts visitors, but also empowers them. They can have a vision that redefines cultural tourism with ideas like the RICE framework and CBED WEBB, concepts that empower local communities and preserve cultural heritage. Some recommendations are to look at cultural sensitivity and utilize community-based methods to honor historical and cultural significance, to remember inclusivity and engagement, to involve local communities in developing tourism and fostering genuine interaction, to ensure their sustainability, ensure that there's a long-term positive impact on the environment, society, and economy. Have authentic experiences, design tourist experiences that support community sustainability and ensure that they know they're tied into the cultural values of the place. Enable communities by having community empowerment that promote cultural preservation, economic vitality, and pride. Include an educational component, something that can educate not just tourists, but those involved about their legacy and their culture. And finally, have a collaborative partnership, something that engages various stakeholders to be included and sustain these initiatives and advocate for support of the communities in need. In conclusion, I covered the origin of the experiential cultural tourism model. I provided a background of vulnerable communities like the COFA nations. I provided an overview of the RICE and CBED frameworks and I provided how to integrate those frameworks into the experiential cultural tourism model. And finally, I gave some criteria on how to design and evaluate a project if it were decided upon. The key elements to consider and remember are that active involvement of local communities is essential. There's a responsibility in showcasing these cultural heritage and community assets, and every issue and project needs to have appropriate measuring of the economic and social impacts. This is a call to action to encourage stakeholders to work together, invest communally, and consider using intermediary organizations to achieve communities' visions of resilience and sustainability. By considering community-centric approaches like the experiential cultural tourism model, perhaps vulnerable communities like the COFA nations can turn the echoes of a nuclear past into opportunities for culture and a rebirth and resilience. Thank you and mahalo. My contact information is provided here. And once again, my name is James Famuina.